what is the separation of church and state?
Okay. So
I'm going to slow roll the questions.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to define the separation of church and state as what it is actually intended to be.
Okay.
So in 1802, Thomas Jefferson had just been recently elected president.
Okay.
And he is writing a letter to the Danbury Baptist. Okay.
Okay.
And which is, so Jefferson himself grew up as a Baptist. And so he's writing to this group who had written him a letter, okay, with concern about the role of, they wanted clarity on the role of government in relation to the church.
Okay.
Okay.
Why?
Because they were concerned that government would begin to encroach on the church.
Okay.
All right. And so they were concerned that as government grew, that it would eventually get to where it was encroaching on the church.
So where it
Okay.
is today.
Correct. That was what they were concerned about.
I said it, not you.
All right. So let me just read a section of this.
Okay.
And it's a much broader section that's usually read from this letter.
Okay.
Usually there's about seven to 8 words that are taken out of this whole letter. And that's how the definition of separation of church and state is usually understood.
Okay.
Okay. And so this is what they wrote Jefferson. Or excuse me, this is what Jefferson wrote the Danbury Baptist. Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative powers of government reach actions only and not opinions. I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. In other words, that the legislator would not dictate that there is going to be a state religion.
Okay.
Okay. And the legislature would not create laws and which would prohibit the free exercise of religion.
Okay.
Okay. And then he says, so then Jefferson says this, thus building a wall of separation between church and state.
Okay.
All right. That is the original part of separation of church and state. So it's not found in the Constitution. That language is not found in any of the amendments. It's found in a personal letter from Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist.
So there is no separation of church and state because it's not in the Constitution or in any or the Bill of Rights or anything.
Right. So
The government still could establish a state religion.
So the practice of the First Amendment, right,
Right.
gives a freedom of religion.
Okay.
All right.
So that couldn't.
That is not supposed to be trespassed upon. In other words, the government's not supposed to encroach into that
By making a state religion or
or restricting
your practice of your religion.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Okay. And so thus this wall of separation between church and state that Jefferson is speaking of here in this letter is not to limit religious activities, and definitely not to limit religious activities in public.
Okay.
Rather, they were to limit the power of the government to prohibit or interfere with those practices.
Okay.
All right. And so, because remember, the context of the framers of our Constitution, of the founding fathers, and for the creating of the amendments, so their context is that they're coming from England, which had a state religion, Church of England.
Catholic.
Well, the Church of England.
Okay.
Which
Which was basically Catholic.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, yes and no.
Mostly,
Simultaneously.
sort of?
Well, what happened was the Church of England or the church within England, the Catholic Church within England, and the king himself was actually excommunicated from the Catholic Church.
The king was.
The king. And therefore, due to his authority and power, that ended the reign of the Catholic Church in England. And it transitioned to just being the Church of England.
Okay.
Yeah. So the state religion in England was Christianity within this Church of England.
Okay.
All right. And it had its progressions. So I won't go through the history of the Church of England. But one of the things that unfortunately was happening was that there was an oppression and even a persecution against those who were not aligning themselves with the Church of England.
So the traders of England that came over here and made America didn't want that to happen.
Right. All
Okay.
of the traders.
Right.
Yes.
The colonists.
The colonists.
The colonizers.
Those terrible colonizers.
Thems.
Those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what they wanted to be sure was there was going to be no state religion.
Right.
And they wanted to be sure that for individual groups that wanted to practice their own religion, that they would have the freedom to do so.
Right.
Without being persecuted or without being labeled as, dissenting. Okay. And
even if that meant we eventually got Mormons.
Sure.
Okay.
Freedom of religion.
Right.
Right. Notice how I did not engage with you on that. All right. And so they do not want the government's involvement in their religious practices or in their beliefs. So for our founding fathers, the idea of a separation of church and state was never to create a chasm where the church couldn't have influence on government. But rather it was to create this chasm where government could not encroach on church.
Okay.
Because in today's society, when you talk about separation from church and state,
right,
most often the way it's viewed or understood is that the church should not have any influence within government.
Okay.
And so you'll even hear phrases like freedom from religion.
Okay.
And where, in other words, where the government should not, there should be no religious influence within government. There should be no intertwining between government and the church.
So the founding fathers viewed it as the government oppressing church.
Correct.
And we now view it as church oppressing government.
Correct. Yep. It's
okay.
Basically it's flipped.
Okay.
Yeah. Because remember, even for the founding fathers, many of them who actually were Christians, but even for those that were deists, they still had a sense of a biblical worldview and even an honoring of God, even if they themselves were not active participants in a Sunday morning gathering of a church.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Jefferson, for example, Jefferson was most likely a deist, but he referred to God and Creator all the time. And he had a biblical worldview. Jefferson's probably most well known for the one who cut out the words of Jesus within his Bible. And so he actually had just using the words of Jesus. So he kind of picked and chose what he went with. And so I wouldn't call Jefferson this follower of Jesus per se, this Christian, but Jefferson, without doubt, had a biblical worldview that was shaping his lens in which he believed that government should operate, that church should operate, and govern even some of his own morality.